a lot of my work is bridging this dialogue between church and mental wellness and sexual wellness. And
in this conversation, just so the audience knows, I want to speak to men, I want to speak to women equally on this, but I think a lot of times we've kind of, especially in the Christian space, we've made sex kind of not really like good, right? It's why is sex and mental health so intertwined?
When the church refuses to have the dialogue, ignorance grows a lot of curiosity. Sex is not just two parts of the body meeting. It's literally like you're becoming one. If you are a person who has experienced sexual trauma and you haven't shared that with your partner, that can be inadvertently hurtful for both parties. And there's a lot of misinformation. We have a lot of people telling us what good sex is. We have a lot of people telling us how we need to be. And we expect men to be ready to go at a drop of a hat. Well, maybe they're just not. I think it's a conversation that's like, just don't have sex till you're married. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we love people well whenever things don't go as
planned?
Yeah.
The other thing, I think we don't really apply the vulnerability to sex that we should.
Whenever you recognize that like the awkwardness is part of the enjoyment of marriage, we forget that like we can be lovers and friends.
All right, y'all, welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, we are talking about everybody's favorite topic. Yes, we are talking about sex today. But Michael, this podcast is about growing your faith, building wealth, and making smart real estate decisions. Like, why are we talking about sex? Like, what does sex have to do with that? Well, the reality is sex has to do with everything. And before we get into that, I want to show you a quick message from one of our sponsors, and then we'll jump into it. Okay. So like I said, we're talking about sex today. And as I always do, I bring in an expert. You know, I understand that like I am the bridge, right? I don't have all the answers. And so I knew I wanted to talk about sex, intersection of sex and business and sexuality, but I couldn't find anybody, right? And so I was talking to a friend about it, and the listening ears of Instagram and the iPhone brought me to our guest today, Miss Elizabeth Westbrook, aka the Sneakerhead Therapist. Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Thanks.
So we're not going to get too crazy today, but if you have kiddos in the car and maybe y'all haven't had that conversation yet, this might be an episode to maybe listen with headphones in, or maybe listen to this by yourself, just out of respect. Like I said, we're gonna get real. We're not gonna get graphic here. So Elizabeth, why don't you quickly just introduce yourself?
Sure.
Let them know who you are. I know you're a sex therapist, but kind of just go into a little bit of kind of your background and what you do.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. You've been nothing but just so kind through this entire process that started via DM a couple months ago. So I have 4 kids. I have a smoking hot husband, and am just kind of like every other woman, I feel like, just trying to juggle it. And so I got my master's in social work from the University of Kansas.
Okay. I'm a Baylor fan, so yeah, sick on Bears. Okay. Gotta flex on that one.
That door is looking real good over there. No, I'm kidding. At least you're not from Missouri. And you don't have to edit that out. I said what I said. Never mind. So got my undergraduate degree in social work from the University of Kansas. Would then go on to work inpatient psychiatric for youth. Found that to be very just disheartening, like just a lot of just grieving in my heart. And so I stayed home and would go on to have 3 of my babies, stayed home for 10 years, started a nonprofit organization, really kind of rooted around trying to advocate for social justice issues. So sex trafficking, mental health, and so on and so forth. And so I finished my master's degree, went back 10 years later. Work in private practice is the area, like the greater Houston area is only credentialed sex therapists through the American Board of Christian Sex Therapists. There's another gal named Dana up in the Woodlands who's been nothing but super kind and compassionate. And so a lot of my work is kind of bridging this dialogue between church and mental wellness and sexual wellness. And I think it's a conversation that's like, just don't have sex till you're married. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we love people well whenever things don't go as planned? It's like, it's God intended.
Rarely do, right?
For sure, 100%. 100%.
And so I so appreciate the space that you're occupying because we need more of it.
Thanks.
And so I think something that I want to get back into the sex therapy conversation,
for sure.
But I want to get a quick understanding of like what's behind the Sneakerhead Therapist. Like what's going on? I wore my favorite sneakers just for you today. These are my Dunks. I just got these. I get compliments on these all the time. So I was like, yo, I got the Sneakerhead Therapist, and so I gotta show up with the shoe. So tell me like, what is your favorite shoe? Why is that your brand?
I have always loved footwear. Just always. I think my mom probably instilled that in me a little bit. And so It is, for me, I used to run a podcast called Kicks for Kingdom through a local nonprofit called Eyes on Me. And so we really just kind of use sneakers as a way to like share the gospel. It is an easy way. It's an easy way to identify with somebody. It is a way to just acknowledge and compliment in a way that's not like nefarious. Hey man, love your kicks.
Yeah.
Cool. Now that's an easy way to be like, tell me about you, right? We're not, there's not an ulterior motive. It's just, okay, like I have respect for that. And so I have found myself kind of having an appreciation for a culture that I didn't grow up in. I'm from Kansas. I'm very Caucasian and very Midwestern. And so I'm like, the amount of respect that I have for just like the swag. And like Jackie Hill Perry in her new album said, the drip is a liberty. And I'm like, I have such an appreciation for people that are just like in their element wherever they are. And so I'm just, I'm drawn to that. And so I think being able to bridge, hey, you can love fashion, you can love sneakers, you can love culture, and then also use that as a way to just build relationships.
Man, that's so good. I love that.
Thanks.
And I love that you're so entwined with Christian hip hop because that's a big like identity. Like for me, is I love Christian hip hop. And so Jackie Hill Perry, the Eyes on Me. I'm forgetting what's the guy's name, the rapper who's behind that.
Trey 9.
And then the other guy, the tall white guy.
Austin Lanier.
Austin Lanier. Austin Lanier. I saw him. I think he was when I first came to Houston. I think I saw him at a concert. And so
they're so kind. They are just as genuine and integrous as you would hope they to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so really transparently, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, and I'm comfortable saying this because I've already kind of started this dialogue with my audience. One of my very first episodes, I talked about a struggle that I had with pornography, right? And so I brought on a coach that I actually hired to help me overcome that addiction. And so we had a conversation around that. And during that experience, I really started to understand how my mental health was connected to my sexuality, and to trauma and to things that were happening in my life that I didn't really understand were happening. I knew that I was reacting and I was having emotions and temptations, but I didn't really understand like where it was coming from. I didn't understand how to navigate it. And so through that experience, I really started to understand like what's underneath, what's starting to drive me. And so it opened up my mind. And so now that I see brokenness everywhere now, right? I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly what's happening in that person. I know why they're acting like that, right? And a lot of times, for me, my sex drive and sexuality were like flags for me about what was going on underneath, right? I would understand, okay, like, hey, my sex drive is higher in this season, like what's going on, right? And it was a trigger, like, okay, there's something going on, right? Or hey, my sex drive is lower, like this is what's happening, you know what I mean? And so I wanted to have a deeper conversation with an expert on this. And so I really kind of wanted to start off this episode with you kind of just explaining like, why is sex and mental health so intertwined? And I think that a lot of times our society tries to make sex is just sex, right? And I think it's spiritual, and I think we talk about that in Christianese. We always talk about like becoming one. And it's a spiritual
Soul
thing,
ties.
but no one really kind of understands it. We just say these things at church, but no one really knows the psychology of it. They don't know what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. So can you kind of break it down for us, kind of why those are intertwined?
Yeah, for sure. I think we have a God who's brilliant. I think at its highest level, right? And so if he is the author and creator of sex, and every part of our body was designed perfectly, and for his glory, right? It all works together in unison. And so when you have, so let's just introduce like trauma to it, right? Like statistically, I think it's 1 in 6 men, will be impacted by sexual assault. Right? It was from Rain. Rain is like a fantastic resource. And so whenever you disrupt, right, God's intended design for sex, and it is used with coercion and manipulation and fear, things go awry. And so your amygdala, which is in your noggin, it is a structure of your brain, is heightened and constantly scanning whenever you're anxious, right? It's the part of our brain that gives us fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so if, let's say, you're in a sexual encounter that is not consensual and hasn't been brought about in a way that was either spontaneous or responsive desire, which means like, oh, I want to sleep with you, husband, in your backwards hat and your gray sweatpants. Like not to stereotype, but kind of. Or wife in your whatever it is that what have you, right? And so whenever you're in this situation and your brain is able to say, okay, this is a safe person to be intimate with, or this is a person that is not safe to be intimate with, it we're firing in all cylinders. And so there is so much more to sex than just an orgasm.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable saying it. I realize that a lot of people may not be, and so just
and I appreciate you, and you have the freedom to be as real as you need to be on this podcast.
Yeah, I think, but also like the trigger warning, which I think will be a powerful necessity on this thing, right? Because some people are not even aware that they have been fed this lie that we can, like women especially, right, are weaponizing their bodies, and it's like, okay, I want to be in control because control has been taken from me, and so now I'm going to go because. And weaponize that because I want that control back. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And so whenever, back to your original question of brain and how it's all intertwined, because sex is not just two, in intercourse, right? Because there's different types of sex. Is not just two parts of the body meeting. It's literally like you're becoming one. Yeah,
I love that. And something that I realized was that, when it came to my desire for sex and kind of the where pornography came in was I kind of thought I was just this lustful person. I thought I was just this, like, I just can't stop looking at X, Y, and Z, right? Yeah. But what I realized was like, there was like a need, like a really healthy need that I was trying to meet, right? Yeah. And I thought, like, I didn't have any sexual trauma, right, as a kid, right? My trauma was based off of, mistrust and, different just situations that happened when I was a kid that wasn't necessarily like most people be like, that's not even like, that's not a horrible thing. It was just like, it was a normal childhood, but there were things that still impacted me, right? Sure. So 9-year-old me still had a hurt feeling. 9-year-old me still had trauma from, I had mommy issues. I had things I was like, I wanted my mom and dad's approval, right? And so for me, the rejection from 9 years old is now at 30 years old, I still have that rejection, right? Yeah. And so when I feel rejected, 9-year-old me shows up, right? And 9-year-old me just looking for a hug and compassion, right? Yeah. And so that, unfortunately, because the enemy twists things, that need for compassion, that need for comfort, it gets met in other things, right? And then even not necessarily from tabling the pornography piece of it, just a natural, like, human, hey, like, I feel desire to have sex, I feel desire to be intimate, like those are natural things that are good, healthy, and that's why God designed that, is so that you have an outlet to get your needs met, right? And so I think that's one thing that I wanted to touch on and kind of get your opinion on, is I think a lot of times we've kind of, especially in the Christian space, we've made sex kind of not really like good, right? It's kind of like it's only good in one context, but it's like it's good in so many contexts that we can like open our mind. It's like, hey, you actually, your desire for sex is good and it's healthy and not something that you need to suppress because, like, for whatever reason. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about, like, what are some of the challenges that are preventing people from having fulfilling sex, both men and women? And and so I'll have a follow-up question, but I'll let you answer that one first. Sure. Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's a lot of misinformation. We have a lot of people telling us what good sex is. We have a lot of people telling us how we need to be, our enthusiasm level. And we expect men to be ready to go at a drop of a hat. Well, maybe they're just not.
Right.
That's okay, right? And so society has, not to like hate on Magic Mike and not to hate on all of that, but I don't think that it's done anybody the service that it thinks that it has.
Yeah.
Because yes, you are seeing men who are using their bodies and moving in a way that is absolutely enticing, right? Like I have eyes, I'm not stupid.
Right.
I'm happily married, but I'm also not. I think we forget that we're still humans after we get married. And so we can't help the fact that, like, oh, there's somebody that's attractive that's in front of us. Like, okay, what do we do with that? Do we notice that?
Yeah.
Or are we going to fixate on it and wonder, okay, is the grass greener over here? And what have you. And so when the church refuses to have the dialogue, I think ignorance grows a lot of curiosity. And so we want to go and we want to figure out, we want to explore. And then we sit here, we can, get on our phones and, like, at the touch of a hat, we've got millions of people that can, oh, well, I didn't know you could do it that way. I didn't know that this is how I was supposed to look. Are my boobs supposed to be up here? Well, I've had 4 kids. They're down here. Am I still lovable and attractive? And so when we are unwilling to go there, I think especially like in Christian circles, in a way that's respectful and tasteful and not explicit, it can really bring, I think, clarity. I think communication brings clarity. And so I use that a lot with, like, my couples. And so if we don't know what we're talking about, we should probably keep our mouth shut. Right. And so if if you've got somebody who's in a position of spiritual authority, whether they should or deserve to be or not, which is an entirely different episode that I'm happy to talk about. And they're talking about pornography, or they're talking about the roles of women or something like that. And then, the sermon is over and they're off stage and they're doing the things that they're encouraging people in the audience to not do. It's like, okay, where do we get a chance to be an integrous religion and follow spiritual leadership that is accurate and truthful and not afraid to have a candid dialogue? I think that's where it gets murky.
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, like, for me, I was trying to meet a healthy need of needing like comfort, right? And I think that's a trigger that I think a lot of men have specifically. And I want to, in this conversation, just so the audience knows, like, I want to speak to men, I want to speak to women equally on this, because I think the issues are different. And I think a lot of times in society we talk a lot about men and sexuality, right? And I think women are only in service to men in that conversation. And so we're going to, like, I want to be clear that we are going to speak to women in this issue, but like right now I'm asking kind of more so on the male side of things. So I think men are the ones who a lot of times we see who are doing damage with sexuality, right? They're using it in the wrong ways. And so speaking to how can people start to become more aware of what is happening, like what is the sexual undertone of what's happening in them that's leading to healthy or unhealthy behavior? You know what I mean? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. I mean, let me start to answer it and you tell me if I'm answering it the way that you're hoping. In anytime that we have a desire, right? Like if I want to go to Siphon, or if I want to go buy a Louis Vuitton bag, or whatever it is, right? Like we like what is it? Am I discontent? Am I celebrating something? Is there, if I'm not willing to like be alone and have my earbuds out, and just be alone with my thoughts and take in the whole of my day or the experiences that are around me, if I'm not good with Elizabeth when the lights are off and nobody's around, and you're not good with Michael whenever nobody's around, that's going to be a fundamental problem, because you're scanning, and I talk about this often in any online platform that I have, which is like, we're constantly polling the audience for who we need to be. Like what version of ourselves is welcome to be here. And so whenever we have to be either hyper masculine, or we have a wife who is weaponizing sex in our relationship right now, which is a common thing, then it's like, okay, well now I need to tone this down and I need to suppress it. And so we're ripe for conflict whenever we don't allow ourselves to be self-aware. And if we haven't been raised in a culture, in a society that has allowed us to be that without it being seen as weak, I think my husband does a really great job. He's got something through the Reclaimed Collective called the Unbroken Man Project. And it's like, we as men are fed all of these lies that we're supposed to be as well. And it's not even like this toxic masculinity thing. It's just, what does a strong Christian man look like? And how does he show up in a way that isn't just stomped all over? And so whenever you are surrounded by your wife, right, who I'm assuming is just the greatest woman in the world.
Today's actually our 3rd anniversary, actually.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Whenever you're with somebody who you're able to have that dialogue with and say, hey, this is how I think I might be feeling, and it's not met with, what is wrong with you?
Right.
It's not met with contempt or disgust. You then are able to say, hey, this is something is awry. And so first, you being able to identify, okay, what is the problem? And then 2, not just carrying that, because when you're suffering in silence, like that's a recipe for disaster too.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And so what I hear you saying is like self-awareness and really understanding who you are and being able to have the freedom to express yourself.
100%.
And I think that's where a lot of men don't have. Like, they don't have the ability to explore, even sexually, explore, like, hey, what is it that I do? like, because there's kind of this thing, this is how you have to show up in the bedroom, or this is how you have to show up to attract women, or this is how if you want to have sex, maybe you're not in a committed relationship and you still want to have a sexual experience. How do you go to a bar or to a club and meet somebody, and like, you know what I mean? Like, and like, obviously those are like, Christian taboo things that, but like, those are things that legitimately happen. Like, everyone, you know what I mean? Everyone's looking for those things, right? And so I think being able to have a space where you can just be free and even know who you are. And I think that's the identity crisis that we have right now. Everyone is trying to find out who they are, and they're finding, oh, my identity is in my sexuality, my identity is in my political party, my identity is in my athleticism, and like, those aren't even actually the real things. And the things that once you get really real with yourself and vulnerable with, I think people realize like, oh, that's not actually me. Well, I don't know who I am, right? And so for me, again, not getting explicit, but even just with me, like, being married for 3 years and just learning what I like sexually, I found myself being really shy for no reason. I was like, why am I being shy? I'm in a committed relationship. Yes. Like, why am I scared, or why am I afraid to say this, or hey, I want to try that? And like those are things that like, okay, like because I was just kind of afraid of rejection, right? I was afraid of those things, and so now it's like almost learning how to even be myself, right? In the most vulnerable time, and I think that's another thing. I think we don't really apply the vulnerability to sex that we should, right? Because it is a vulnerable thing. It is. And you know, especially when it's in a really healthy position, like you really are opening yourself up and you're creating the deepest connection that you can create with someone. Yeah. And so there is sensitivity around that, right? And I don't think that we apply a bunch of steamy hotness to it, right? We make it all hot, right? And it's like, this is like deeply emotional, right? This is like a deep moment, and it can be a lot, it's fun, and it takes a lot of different shapes and forms. But I think that's just something that I think I've learned that I really want to, get more freedom in for myself, but I think I want other people to have that freedom, and it really only comes from self-awareness. And so that's why I think you being a sex therapist is so impactful, because people can probably explore that with you, right? Before they maybe get to the bedroom or get to their spouse, where you can talk through it. So then when it's time for you to show up in the moment, like you kind of have a game plan or roadmap of how to go through it, right? Or maybe you are something you want to try and your spouse doesn't want to do it, right? How do you navigate that? You know what I mean? A lot of guys, it's trigger, it's fight, it's, you know what I mean? For women, it's shame. Oh, like, you know what I mean? There's like so many different things that I think happen. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we forget that like we can be lovers and friends, right? Like my husband is absolutely my best friend in the entire world, and he is my lover through and through. And so he creates a culture of safety there. A lot of times, like with couples or people who may be mismatched there, it's like we have somebody who maybe is a little more comfortable being vocal in, hey, I wish that we could have more oral sex, or foreplay doesn't last as long as I would like, or, being able to say that. I often speak to this idea of like, just choose an emoji that has nothing to do with sex. And maybe it's like a bowl of spaghetti or cereal or whatever, right? And you can text that either to signify, hey, like, Saturday afternoon delight might be on the table, or whenever you get home, like you're on kid duty because we have plans. Being able to communicate in a language that doesn't feel as explicit, like for those of us like me, right? Like I'm not anti-purity culture in that. I think that there is biblical truth to the notion. I think the way that it's been delivered often has been really abusive and hurtful, and so. When you have millennials like myself who have been kind of fed this notion that you do not have sex until you're married, and then on your wedding night, you better be very enthusiastic and very on top, and it better be satisfying for everybody, and nobody is like awkward. Whenever you recognize that like the awkwardness is part of the enjoyment of marriage, you get a chance to play, and maybe that looks like you and your wife. Do you guys have kids?
No.
Okay.
Hopefully now.
So you don't have like me and my 1 million children, right? It's like, okay, hey, maybe we need like a sex overnight. Where it's like, we're just going to know that things are going to be awkward. It's going to be weird. It's going to be uncomfortable. Sounds are going to be made. Bodies are going to like, fat rolls are going to touch. But like, this is like, we have our bodies to explore. And so if you are a person who has experienced sexual trauma and you haven't shared that with your partner, and then they're going into it and it's like, hey, I want to be vulnerable with you, but you didn't realize that the time that they were sexually assaulted or something happened to them whenever they were a kid is now being triggered here because of something you said or a song that came on or whatever. That can be inadvertently hurtful for both parties. And so I think on one hand, for sure, we want to play and we want to have fun and we want to like explore and communicate in a way that is not uncomfortable, but also has this trauma-informed place of I want you to share with me that this happened, and it may be a no-go. Like this particular position that you love may be a no-go because somebody stole that from your husband or your wife, and that is just and you love them well through that.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the issues I think men are having, and we're gonna come back to some of that, but I want to ask you something just really bluntly. Like, does God care about women's sexual health? Because I feel like women have just been like, it's just like, it's unfair, right? And I'm like, where has God been at? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? So like, what are your thoughts on like God's heart for women having like healthy, amazing sex and sexuality and safety?
Yeah, I mean, he made the clitoris, and so there's your answer. It has no sexual function other than female gratification. There's some like psychology like nonsense that back in the day, it was like the type of like orgasms women would have. Like if they were clitoral, they were immature, but if they were like vaginal, then they were mature. And it's just like all of this guesstimating that we're doing about the function of like women in sex. And so the female clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings, which is twice as many as like the head of a man's penis. And so it is just this finely wound, beautiful expression, I think, of God's love for us. And I think that whenever because on one hand you have like this like no masturbation rule. We have this idea of like it's only between, intercourse between a man and a woman, and that may be where you land. And I'm not here to tell anybody anything for their convictions with the Lord, right? But I do think that whenever we come to a point of like reaching climax in a relationship, whether it's through intercourse or otherwise, right, there's a vulnerability and there's a letting go. And so whenever you allow somebody to see you or hear noises or you move in a kind of way or whatever, like that is just that is such an intimate thing. And so to answer your question, absolutely he cares, and he cares so much that the body was made in the way that it was, and I think it should be handled with care.
So how can we, without getting into a therapy session here,
I'm not feeling you, so we're good.
For men and women, I guess how do we prioritize women's pleasure better, right? And so on the women's side, how can women have more control or more initiative in their own pleasure, right, and taking more of that ownership of that, and then for men, in committed relationships or not, how can men help women experience more pleasure? Because I think you watch the narratives in all the movies, and it's always like man gets his, girl's kind of left, kind of like she's got to go to the bathroom and get her vibe. You know what I mean? It's kind of like those kind of things where it's kind of like, like it just looks like, like we just can't get it to get, you know what I mean? Or there's like, obviously there's some movies where it's unrealistic, right? It's like, okay, there's no way, like, you know what I mean?
Everybody's going at the same time every time.
It's like, what is going on? Like anybody who's actually having real committed sex knows like those movies are not real, right? So I'm just kind of like, how do we do this, right? Because it seems like no one actually knows what's going on. No one knows how to do this, right? So I'm sure somebody's figured out, but it's not like the mass majority of society doesn't know, right? So what do we do? I
mean, everybody's a sexpert these days, right? Like everybody has a platform, everybody has an Instagram page, and everybody, like, especially with the like eruption of pop psychology, everybody has an idea about like how to do this, right? Like protect your peace at all costs. Like your body matter. Your body is like beautiful and sultry, and it is. And so a lot of what is this my camera?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go down the barrel here because I think this matters. Like one of my primary emphasis in my work is on female sexual shame, the intersection of faith and sexuality, so LGBTQ, and then betrayal trauma. And so that's working with couples with any type of infidelity, be it emotional, physical, and what have you. And so the female sexual shame, to my girls who have been fed and believed the lie that they are only there for even their husband's pleasure, for their boyfriend, for somebody who just implied consent on their behalf. I cannot just like level with you as a woman enough to say that I am so sorry, and that none of that, you didn't dress weird or wrong, you weren't listening to the wrong type of music, you didn't drink too much, nothing that you did in the way that you were assaulted and victimized had anything to do with something that you could have done differently. And so the shame and the guilt that you may still be carrying from that, I just pray in Jesus' mighty name that you are just relinquished and freed from that in this moment and on. And so he is so redemptive and so restorative and so in the interest of like reclaiming sexuality for good and for his glory. And so your pleasure is not just physical, it is intimacy, it is vulnerability. And so you being able to say, like you can even do something like sensate focus, where it's like, okay, what type of touch do I enjoy? Probably invest in a good lubricant, right? And if you've got kids, or if you're of a certain age, or it just might be better, right? Like you can order that on Amazon or order that somewhere in an indiscreet box. You don't have to go walk into like Adam and Eve. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so being willing to know that I'm going to sit in a moment of vulnerability, and maybe you have a sweatshirt on, and you're not fully exposed. I think where you are able to be touched by somebody who loves you and has covenanted with you, I think is a really powerful thing. And then I think for husbands too, like we have probably been told that this is the way that we need to pleasure a woman and it needs to look like this. And it's like, it's okay if you've missed the mark a little bit. You didn't know, you're not an expert in your wife's body yet. 3 years in, 5 years in, 30 years in, right? Like our bodies are changing. And so I think giving yourselves grace to be able to explore, and say, okay, this does feel good. It's not a shameful thing to be like, yes, please, that part right there, that was it. Remember that, lock that one away, save it in your notes app. Whatever you need to do, that is it.
Okay, so I hear you saying exploration and play. Those are the kind of things I'm hearing you say.
100%.
And so I think those are the things that I think when it comes to overcoming shame, and I think Christians specifically really stepping into all that God has them from a sexual standpoint is really giving yourself the freedom to explore, right? And to try the things that your body, you know what I mean? And so I guess my other question would be, a lot of times we get ideas for things from porn or from things that we see in society, right?
100%,
so sometimes it's kind of like, okay, well, how do you actually explore that in a way that is honoring? You know what I mean? Because there are so many things that are dishonoring, right? That we're like you said earlier that, I didn't know I could do it. I want to try that. Like, you know what I mean? And those maybe there are things that I definitely think there is sexual dysfunction that does exist as well. That things that aren't honoring to both bodies, right? And so how then does someone, if it's not just their natural, like how do you learn how to explore, right? And are there resources? Because that may be where you need to go to a professional like yourself or resources to say, okay, like how do I do this, right? What are the ideas that I can try? You know what I mean? So like, what would be your advice to that for someone who's like, I don't even know where to start, right?
Yeah, Urban Dictionary is not it.
Right.
Like just maybe not there. Here is the thing that I believe to be wholly true. And I think there's so much more freedom in your marital bed than you think. And so kind of the ground rules, at least for me, professionally, and what I see and what the research shows is as long as it's not involving other people, and that is porn. Like I'm a staunch anti-porn. I just am. I see just no positive impact in any way whatsoever. And people may rake me over the coals for that, and I'm happy to reply. Just because the devastation of it is, one, it's just a highly trafficked industry, and then two, neither here nor there. So whenever you are, hold on a second, rephrase your question. Freedom in the bedroom.
So like, how do you explore without like getting your ideas from unhealthy places?
I mean, you're going to hear and see things just in general, just like living in the world, right? And so you get to decide, I think, what to do with that. There's not been,
so basically there's no good or bad. There's no line on that. You said it seems like you're saying as long as it doesn't involve other people
or animals.
I'm sad that we have to say that, but unfortunately,
I mean, there's like a lot of like as I sit here and I think through like, and people might like laugh at that, but it's true, right? Like there's so much freedom there to be like, hey, what toys do we want to use? What do we need? Is it hard for me to like women? It's difficult for them to sometimes achieve orgasm with with intercourse. And so do we need to bring some accompaniments in there that are not in substitution to? And so I think if we're replacing intimacy with our spouse with masturbation, if we are like, and you may find, I want to touch my body in front of my partner because one, they find that pleasurable and enjoyable. Okay. And two, that brings them into trying to figure it out, okay, what works for you, what doesn't, instead of having to dialogue and say, hey, to the left, hey, you on top, hey, not whatever. Or a man, if he's struggling with premature ejaculation, right? There's some positions that may work better than others to help control depth and control and things like that. And so there is a freedom there for sure. But I think you don't know until you try it, right? It's like, oh, I actually didn't love this way. It made me feel kind of used. So we just don't do that again.
Makes sense. I like that. And so let's kind of bring it back because I like you mentioned it earlier in terms of your specialty, really connecting sexuality to other aspects of our lives, right? Because when I mentioned, like we typically don't talk about this topic on our podcast, not really, but I think it is so integral in terms of in terms of like how you show up sexually, your sexual health impacts the rest of your life, right?
It does,
So my question for you is like, what are the pros and cons of, you know, having a healthy sex life on your business or on other areas of your life, right? Like, what is the impact? I mean, if you're not having, you know, fulfilling sex life, is that showing up at work? Are you showing up less good for your family? Like, I guess kind of talk through that with me.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, business ownership is just a part of who we are, right? Like, we're not these monolithic people. We are followers of Christ. We are spouses. We are friends, and we are, you know, all of this stuff. And so if we just compartmentalize ourselves and we're just are locked in on only our identity is X, Y, and Z, then we're screwed. And we just are. Like, I don't know how else to say that. And so if your marriage, I think it's like whenever we talk about people who are in a position of authority in a church, right? Like, and it's like this notion of like, your home must be in order.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I get that. That there is something to the fact that like, I'm probably going to be more impactful in my businesses whenever I go home at night to somebody that I know is faithful to me, that I know cares about me, that I know loves me. And we also get to play and have fun in the bedroom, right? And so whenever you feel supported by your spouse sexually, emotionally, financially, what have you, that bleeds into every area. And so I would be cautious about giving too much credit to sexual health and saying that is just, the business is struggling because, you know, you're not putting out enough. It's like, okay, whoa, manipulation. Pause on time. Maybe say that in a different way that communicates, hey, I'd like to have more sex with you. Because I'm noticing at work I'm a little more agitated. Like, for sure we see in men that there is a little more, like, we're a little snippy. We're a little more aggressive. Things bother us, and maybe the way that...
And that's what I went back to earlier when I was talking about, like, knowing the healthy needs that sex meets, because like those is a stress reliever, right? So I mean, I've read. I mean, it might have been one of the pop culture, articles, but in terms of like always saying like, you know what I mean, how it impacts anxiety and stress and things. So I mean, those could be legitimately be things where, hey, you and your partner need to have a conversation around that topic. Where like, hey, I actually need to have more sex because I'm in a really stressful time in work, or but as long as it's, you know, as long as that conversation is done, I think healthily, which that's what you're talking about, is like having those conversations, learning how to navigate those. I think that is also a positive as well.
Can I give a script for that?
Yeah.
So here's like a way that you might be able to enter that conversation, right? Like, I'm speaking for a man or for a woman, right? Because women sometimes have higher sex drives than their wives do, or than their husbands do. In your dynamic, if you are finding that like sex for me brings just... It's like an exhale. I can endure. I feel better. I've got clarity of thought. Hey, babe, I love you, and I want to let you know that like I am so attracted to you. I feel cared for by you. I am super overwhelmed at work, and I've been thinking. I'll listen to the Blueprint podcast, and this guy Michael, he's so great, and he had this chick on, and she said something, and I want to see how this lands on you. And it's this idea of, Are you willing? Where do we believe one? I would say orgasm exists in our relationship. Does it need to be partnered? How do we feel about it being solo? Does it have to always be intercourse? Because some couples may find that they, you know, using manual stimulation works, right? Do you need me to have sex with you? Or are you just looking for the release that comes from that? And so being able to say, this is something that I would find value in. I know this is kind of how we are in our relationship. Is it something that we can prioritize? Is it something that we can put in an effort to? And I am fine with just you using your hand. I'm not needing this intimate romp.
Okay.
And I think if you can level with somebody, because for women, often stereotypically, it's so much more mental. I got to unload the dishwasher, and I really want you to be on top of me right now. And like, can you just hurry up? You know what I mean? Like, the kids are screaming. And so that can bring its own set of challenges.
Right.
And so being able to first lead with, hey, I love you. I care about you. You matter to me. And also, I feel connected to you. I want this to come from you. Is this something that we can make more of a priority for the next couple of weeks?
Yeah. Okay.
Being candid about that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I find that, again, communication brings clarity, and we don't have to beat around the bush. We can just say, I'm in this. Can you help?
Yeah. Okay. And so on the flip side of that, I obviously, like a lot of women, I think, feel the pressure to perform like that. You know what I mean? Which takes away the pleasure for them, takes away the joy of it. Like, hey, I'm just doing this because you just like, you know what I mean? Like, you're stressed out and you just need, you know what I mean? And so I think like that kind of energy, I think also is like, I want to recognize that also, okay, well, how do we have that conversation to where women feel like they want to contribute that, or a woman may come to, you know, may be the initiator of that conversation, absolutely. Right? And so that's a completely different kind of conversation, right? Yeah. So then what would be your response from a woman's perspective on that? Yeah.
I would give women maybe a little bit more of if it is not, it may not be as contractual as maybe it sounds, right? Like there may be a level of, I want to be able to come alongside and like love you well. Or the answer is just no. Like her also having the freedom to be able to say no, like that's not, I can't, like I'm so stressed out, I'm so overwhelmed. And then he gets to work out with the Lord how is this, how am I going to like die to myself in this season right now where I've asked for this, but my wife's uncomfortable. Okay, and I'm going to respect that boundary. Yeah. You being able to, as a wife, be able to communicate that and not feel like just because your husband is asking, you have to say yes, or that it's this obligatory, like, fine. I think that really matters. Like where you show up in that space, if it's begrudging, like he knows. He knows. Yeah. Like it's not going to achieve the desired result, as it were. And so I think giving yourself the permission to use your voice and to feel okay saying no, to reject. I think sometimes we forget that no is a complete sentence, and we would have had, hopefully, right? Like if communication outside of the bedroom is wonky, this conversation is going to go very poorly. Yeah. And so if we can't communicate well about, okay, unloading the dishwasher and who's taking the kids to school and who's buying what for the team snacks, it's going to be much more difficult to say, I'm needing some more orgasms in our relationship.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I wanted to add, I think is like the no not being just a no. Right. Yeah. The no being, okay, but like, here's what we can't do. Like, you know what I mean? Or here's why, or here's the solution. I think that's something that's always fulfilling to me as a man, is like, I'm okay with hearing a no. Yeah. And it's as long as I feel like, okay, and it goes back to, again, what's your trigger, right? The trigger for me is rejection. So just a no for me is like, I'm learning how to work through that. But like, okay, if it's opening a conversation and I can like talk through a conversation, now there's this flow of information, then that is fulfilling, and that helps you then go to the Lord and be like, okay, hey God, how do I navigate this, right? And so one thing, one of my last questions for you is, you know, and this may be, you know, I feel like Christians, we always want to ask, like, what can I do? What can I not do? Like, what's the line, right? Yeah. And so you were talking about like solo play. So do you recommend that your clients do, so, you know, like solo intimacy apart from, so there is a situation where like, hey, one partner just needs, anxiety, the anxiety thing. Would you recommend that? Because I think obviously that gets into the, there are a lot of elements that go into that, right? That's where a lot of times for men, pornography comes into the play. Like, so like, okay, how do you how would you navigate that scenario?
Yeah, I would navigate the scenario that's in front of me in the room, for sure. Like, I would do myself as Elizabeth and myself as a professional large disservice to paint with a broad stroke there, because, like, if we think about couples who are separated long distance, we have, praise the Lord for our military, right? Like, and they're married. Do we just say you're just celibate and orgasm free while you're deployed? I don't really know that that's the move. Yeah. But I also don't know if somebody's going to take a sound bite and be like, well, that sex therapist lady said that I'm free to masturbate anytime I want. It's like, first of all, I did not watch the podcast in its entirety. And so that is for sure one, like, where is your conviction with the Lord on that? Where, what are the surrounding situations? Do you have a wife who's bedridden, and because she is 9 months pregnant and she has a difficult pregnancy? Are both of you dealing with a significant health issue? And so that there for sure can be times, I would say, that it is okay. Is it partnered? Is are you guys together, but one what if you don't have arms, right? Like the disabilities and things like that kind of come into play as well. And so it would do nobody any service, I think. I'm not trying to punt on your question.
No, and I think you're answering it in terms of, I think it goes back to, I guess the thing is like communicating and understanding the situation. Yeah. And then it goes back to, again, just understanding like what is the underneath need. For sure. Like what need are we meeting here, right? Is this strictly just a lust thing? Like, you know what I mean? Or is this like, hey, there's a legitimate sexual need that needs to be met in their marriage, and how do we navigate that? If both people are on the same page and there's mutual agreement, then it's deciding, hey, are we comfortable with this or are we not comfortable with this?
Is it a supplement too? Like, are we doing it in place of? Am I doing it because I'm upset with you? Is I rejected? Am I going to, did I take matters into my own hands, for lack of a better word, right? Yeah. And then, 3 hours later, my wife or my husband is interested in being intimate. Well, I don't have the desire because, you know what I mean? And that's kind of grasping for straws a little bit. But when you're substituting anything for like the real thing, golly. Yeah. Like that just, I believe that in its core, sex and intimacy is so much more than just who's getting off. And so whenever we miss out on that opportunity for connection, because listen, I am all about like, where'd you go? Capitol Grill? Is that where you went for Thanksgiving? Yeah. Right. I'm all about some Capitol Grill sex. Like we had like whatever, put on some like genuine, let's roll. But also sometimes you just need to like drive through Raising Cane's. Like sometimes it's just good enough. Right. Depending on your season life, it's just good enough. And so whenever we rightly hold sex in our relationship, which is like 0.1% of our relationship in totality, that 0.1% can be really rocky if it's not there. Right. And people are often like, how often should I be having sex? And it's like, do not ask me to put anybody in a hole there, because that's not for me to decide. And so that's it's a journey. Like you're for sure, like we're all gonna ebb and flow with it. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that real honest answer. And sorry, I'm not trying to put you set you up for a soundbite. No. But please do. Yeah. Make sure you tag me. So talk about Reclaim Collective. What's happening here? Kind of talk a little bit about kind of this initiative. Yeah. Yeah. So we our biggest thing that we're working on right now is we've got a women's conference in April 11th and 12th at Crossroad Church in Katy. 300 women. I'm speaking on reclaiming mental and sexual wellness. We've got a panel of 8 women reclaiming our faith, trauma, marriage, singleness, careers, motherhood, and just an opportunity for women of Greater Houston to be able to come and just really take discipleship to the next level. We're grouping women by zip code, following them for 90 days, getting them connected to churches. And so the whole business model is really to create concierge type resources, to offer consulting, sexual consulting, which has nothing to do with therapy. Therapy is a lot of retroactive work and looking backwards and things like that. Coaching, consulting, we're moving forward. What's our plan? What are our measurables and our deliverables and things like that? And so we really just marry the business world, church, mental health, sexual health, all in a way to have a candid dialogue through events. I love that. Things like that. And what I love so much about that is not only are we talking about this, but you're actually living it out. Oh, right. And so I love that like you're creating the pathway to everything we just talked about. I'm sure if I was watching this episode, I'll probably have more questions than answers after everything we've talked about. And I love that you are creating a pathway. Hey, here's how we get the answers. Absolutely. And I'm coming alongside you. Yes. And I think that's the job of the church, is to come alongside you. I don't think the job of the church is to have all the answers. And I think that's the disservice that we have done to the church. And I will, I'm a PK, and I know what my dad and my mom have gone through in terms of people put expectations on church leadership. But you have to have all the answers. You got to preach all the sermons to fix everyone's problems and have all the money to fix everything. And it's like, it's not realistic, right? And so the job of the church is to come alongside and to guide and to show you the resources, and to be there when you fall, right? Yes. And because you will fall. Absolutely. You will fall, and to be there, to have a grace, to be there graciously or disciplinary, because I definitely think that there are a lot of people who abuse this conversation, and a lot of men and women, like you said earlier, who are using sex and using their bodies in a way that is like not honoring to other people, right? And so I think there does need to be like accountability in the church too, and we do need to be like, hey, there are things that are not okay. And we live in a broken world, and so I don't succumb to the place that the church has to have all the answers and do all the things right. But I think the church needs to empower people, and so that's why I'm so proud of you, because you're using your skill set, your knowledge, your expertise to empower people and to create the resource that is just not really there. I mean, there's just not a lot of people doing what you guys are doing. And so I'm super excited for that. And is registration still open for that? What are details on that? Early bird tickets are open right now. It's a Friday night kind of VIP situation. We'll end with comedy, right? Because I think sometimes we forget, like, Christians have fun. Yeah. It doesn't have to be all like hellfire and brimstone. Like we can laugh.
Y'all bringing in John Chris or what? Like
no, Melissa Williams.
Okay.
Seriously, Melissa. She's a riot.
Okay.
And so she'll be there. We're gonna have a bunch of swag. We're gonna do merch.
So wear your best shoes.
100% wear your best shoes. Yeah, I'm working on the merch line right now, and I think that, and then we're just like hitting it because the women, like, I want it to be so representative, like, of the body of Christ. Like, diversity matters, and the people, like, we're gonna have live worship. And I've told everybody, it's like, I don't want a stage of just, like, white women. Like, I just don't.
Yeah.
I want to show, like, okay, the body of Christ is beautiful, and it is just such a treasure to be a part of. And so whenever we get women who look like us, who have been through things that it's like, I see you, but how is that possible that you struggled with X, Y, and Z? And we humanize the experience, and we're no longer living in shame of our stories, but we're like, hey, I did this. And I am on this stage, and the Lord is using me.
Love it.
It's a beautiful place to be.
Man, that's so good.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming on, Elizabeth.
Absolutely.
This was a bold conversation. Obviously, you're a sex therapist. You talk about this all the time.
I do.
And so I know you're comfortable in this space, but
you did so great.
Thank you.
You held your own.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really passionate about this, and I'm really passionate about challenging men to be better specifically. And so if we have a second conversation, I want to lean into that.
Okay.
And I feel like men get to dominate the conversation so much, like the Andrew Tates of the world, and those guys just make everything so toxic. And I just think there's so many men who are just genuinely struggling and don't know how to navigate sex and navigate empowering women. And I think there are a lot of men that want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I want to, for the sake of women, because I have so many great women in my life that I love, for the sake of women, I want to help empower men to be better and challenge us to be better. And so that's something I'm really passionate about. So I want to use this conversation as a gateway, and as a test to see, like, hey, are people ready for this conversation on the Blueprint podcast? Because like we may need to have more of this because like we talked about, it impacts so many areas of your life. It's not just about what happens in the bedroom. It's like what happens next. That's absolutely awesome. Cool. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for watching the Blueprint podcast. Again, we're going to have Elizabeth's information in the description. Register for her conference. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Hit a like button, and we'll see you in the next episode.